Intro in 3, 2, 1.
It's high noon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Foul Play. That's Fantasy Overwatch League Play. My name is DeathBlow. I'm joined with me this week, not by the Blevins, but by Asmith. Usually it's going to be both of them, but this week we are operating shorthanded. Asmith, how you doing today, buddy?
Man, I am good and super excited that we're actually able to do this.
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. Everything's kind of coming together here for us. It was iffy if we were going to get to do the show tonight or when we were going to get to do it. We did not have a ton of time to really sit and ruminate on these stats. So hopefully, we can kind of continue the conversation that we're going to start here today throughout the week in the Discord, on Twitter. You can always join the High Noon Discord. There's a couple of different fantasy text channels set up where we're kind of monitoring things, answering questions in the mailbag channel there. Also on Twitter at HNP_foul play, FOWL play. You can send us any questions you have throughout the week as things kind of adapt and change drastically here. Everything is happening really, really quickly. So bear with me as I do have a technical difficulty, though. I think I covered that pretty well. I'm not going to lie. I was able to readjust things.
That might have been the best plug there, period. That was so good.
The best part of the show just happened. I hope you guys really, really enjoyed it.
It's all downhill from here.
Wanted to start the show here and talk about something we actually just finished doing. It was a lot of fun. I had a really good time with it. A very different way, and a more correct way, but we're getting there. We're getting there to look at Fantasy Overwatch League. What we've done is we basically gotten an 8-man league together. This is kind of our experts league here, so I'm going to forget people because my technical difficulty involved closing windows. Do you have the draft thing open? Can you list?
We'll have it in
everybody off?
2 seconds.
All right. Well, to start us off, I can slow roll this here a little bit. We do have, obviously, our 3 hosts in this league as well. So that's myself, Asmith, and the Blevins are all in there. Abnerd666 and Invictus OW from the Fantasy Watch podcast are there as well. It's another podcast. If you really are enjoying these Fantasy Overwatch League conversations, you can look them up as well. They're in this league. We do also have Melarina and Slambo, formerly of the Cavalry. You also have a Slambo in a variety of Overwatch League related shows and Overwatch podcasts in general. Also, Blazin' Bob was in the league as well, of Watchpoint Radio, and he's got a couple shows. Everybody's got multiple shows now.
Right. Yeah, that was all of them.
Off the top of my head, I'm on fire tonight. I am unstoppable. Speaking of being unstoppable and on fire, why don't we have a conversation quickly about how our week 1 matchups went for the leagues that we're in. Asmith, I know you're in 3 leagues and I am in 4. How did you do this week, bud?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to have to hang my head in shame a little bit. I went 1-2. Granted, both actually in all 3 leagues I played in, I played the highest score pretty much. So it was tough sledding. I just had really tough matchups. Did really well. In the 1 league I won, I scored over 930 points, and I beat the person by 15 points. Just shows you how close those matchups really were. But overall, I'm really excited about the teams I got. Just a couple of switches due to play time, and I'll be good to go.
Yeah, definitely. We all learned so much this week, and just like in Overwatch itself, in Fantasy Overwatch, just looking at who won and who lost doesn't necessarily give you the full story. It's kind of one of the fantasy traps of being a team with, 3rd highest points scored, but by far the most points against. Everybody just loves to blow up against you. Did not really have that problem myself this week. In my 4 leagues, I went 3-1. I actually had a really, really good week. The one where I lost, and we didn't actually get to talk about this, but I actually pulled a Blevins really, really hard in the one league that hadn't yet drafted when we recorded. Like, it drafted that night, like I think an hour and a half after we got off the air. And I ended up with 5 tanks. I completely pulled a Blevins. I have infinity tanks. That's the only place I lost that's in a podcast battles league. I lost to Not Rob from Omnic Labs. So no shame there, obviously. Got a little bit of work to do, but I won all the other ones, including an 866 to 533 shellacking of our very own The Blevins. Riding the pine a little too hard, if you will, as that is his team name. So, yeah, gonna have to find a different horse there, Blevins. But moving along here, yeah, just some other leagues. And one I want to highlight here, okay, this is, we talked about last week about how you can, like, overplay your tanks and supports. I had no business winning one of these lineups. Okay, I had Zupe with negative 49 points. Okay, I had Fissure with a stone cold 0. I had Bunny with his like 1-2 maps, like barely played. I had Agilities with very, very limited play time. He was 2 or 3 maps, though he did put up 109 points, had a really good performance in the limited action. But because my opponent played 3 tanks and 2 supports, and one of those supports was Hegopin, you know, I was really just able to kind of sneak that one out. So when we talk about just playing your DPS players, that's because obviously Houston didn't have the best week, but Linkser was just fine, 202 points. Taimu was just fine in Envy's bad week, 221 points. Play these DPS players, guys. So enough of that kind of distraction there and just talking about how great we are, or not over on the other side. Shots fired.
Next week.
Yes, so we're going to move into what's going to be the initial start-off segment of just about all these shows here, cleverly named by Thornrain. Shout-outs to Thorn for coming up with this name, but we're going to go with leaders and feeders. So to start things off, everything's so new. Most of these guys at the top of the list, I think, are a surprise, right? With a couple of exceptions.
Yeah. Most everybody on this list was a surprise as a couple. You know, there are a few that we kind of figured would be.
Yeah, so normally what we're going to look at here in this section is going to be people that overperformed from expectations. If we put somebody at number 1 overall scoring and they get number 1 overall scoring, you're probably not going to see them here too much. But for the most part this week, we're just going to read you the top 5 point scores for every single position. I'll start off with the tanks. Number 1, we had Fate with 176 points. Number 2 was Bishu with 158 points. I think 2 surprises straight off the bat, not at the top of my tank boards. Gesture, 119. Meko, 103. And Gamzu with 101. I still don't want him, but you are so far correct.
Wow, man. We're just going to get into how correct I am as we continue.
Let's just focus more on our records. Let's just focus more on our records. But yeah, you can lead us off with the support leaders here.
All right. On the supports, you're looking at Badozin, and then Neko is after him. Are we reading the point scores?
I did, but
okay. Badozin with 122. Yeah, right. Neko, who was a sleeper pick for me last week, 83. Harry Hook in third with 67. Jonak with fourth, 65 points, and Shaz with 57, rounding out your top 5 in supports.
Yeah, no Jaehong, so we'll have to dive into that at some point.
Interesting, yeah.
That's a thonker for sure. But taking a look at the DPS top 5 here, there's one surprise here, and I think for the rest of it, it's like just orders, kind of what we're looking at. But
yeah.
We have Fleta, number 1, just a beast. The perennial, or the favorite, not perennial, but the favorite for kind of MVP for everybody so far. Really starting off strong, 363 points. Then we've got Soon at 300, a surprise number 2 for me. I didn't see that one coming. I'll talk a little bit more about him later on in the show. We've got Prophet with 252 points, Effect with 251, and man, they might be 0-2, but their DPS players showed up and put up some points. Taimu also from the Dallas Fuel here at 221. How about these flex players here? What do we got, Asmith?
All right, the top 5 flex, you got Envy with 172, who, let's be real, I think all these flex players we're going to talk about should be tanks. Should be. But Zumba, 160 in second. Fury in third with 139, Nevix in fourth with 114, and Poco, surprise Poco, with 101.
Yeah, big shout outs to Poco. You've got to be more familiar with him than I was, but and a bit of a role change here, right? Isn't he moving over into the flex tank?
I think he played flex earlier. Earlier in his career he was a DPS, but he played flex with his last team, and he was known as one of the best divas and Zarias. Yeah, I think he's even more known for his Zarya in Europe. So he's a French player. Those French players.
Yeah, really.
It's interesting.
Really strong performance, a big contributor into ruining my weekend. Although, man, I got to say, we might as well just talk about it. Both our teams are 0-2 here. And I got to say, at the end of the day, I'm just ecstatic to have company, right? Like, instead of this animosity that would have just been, if Houston was 2-0 and Dallas was 0-2, Houston fans would have been brutal.
I would be gloating. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. And if it was the other way, it would be the exact same way. But thankfully, misery loves company, and both teams decided to disappoint in the opening week. To varying degrees, obviously, here, I think for both teams in matchup, right? Like, one was a surprise loss and the other one was like okay, that's okay. But either way, 0-2 is where we're sitting. Speaking of losers, we're going to talk about some players that maybe contributed to you guys losing your matchups here for fantasy, that will continue to be the focus no matter how many rants we go off on about our teams. This is our first chance to really talk in front of a camera since these matchups got played. So, who knows how many distractions and, I'm blanking on the word that we always use.
Tangents?
Yeah, tangents we go on. Thanks for that save, A. Smith. Knew we kept you around for a reason. Starting us off on the feeders here. Why don't we alternate this time around?
I'll take the first one. Since
okay.
This is the one that I picked to do so well and be the best tank. He was number one on my tank board, and he absolutely fed. And that would be Fraggy. Came in with -6 fantasy points. -6. I mean, -6. Oh my gosh. I started him in one of my leagues. I think my whole theory about aggressive tanks really bit me in the butt there.
Yeah, so, you hid that one from me before you said it on the air, and I didn't know you were going to say it. And with no time to react to it, man, it sounded good. I was like, oh, I can't believe he thought of that one. I was mad I didn't. Now I can happily just, lead those questions to you. Like, I drafted Fraggy, and it's all your fault. You can send those right to @Mr. Smith 005.
Yeah. That is, I think I'm going to change the Twitter handle. It's a little long.
Well, once the hate tweets about Fraggy start coming in, I'm sure you'll have to.
Exactly. Divert that away.
The other tank feeder here that we're going to go with, I'm going to split this one up, okay? We're going to always cheat at these little games and find ways to get extra players in for some extra things to talk about. But I'm going to lump these two Dallas Fuel tanks together and say that Coco at 38 points and XQC at 32 points really didn't deliver for fantasy owners this week. There was lineups where neither of them were out there, like Junkertown. They're just not going to run one of them, which obviously hurts both of them. But even after that, they split, and I don't know what direction this is going to go, but for one of them, it could be very, very badly. Given the initial issues for Dallas, I'm almost leaning towards Coco. Like, let's revert back to what we were when we were just like winning nonstop and untouchable, and let's just revert back to that and try to right the ship. But one of them will probably jump ahead of the other one, but we really wanted to see that happen this week. We wanted to get that question answered, and we definitely didn't, and they definitely didn't help you too much with a win here. So why don't you talk about the first, or whichever one of the two supports feeders that you want to talk about here?
The support feeder, the first one that I want to discuss is Boombox, okay? Boombox was, in most people's minds, one of the top supports there. I mean, Boombox is a legendary Zen. Dude does really well and only came away with 16 fantasy points. Now, if you look at it, you want to actually break it down. He did really well against Houston and literally bombed against London. So if you're looking at the matchup there, Boombox really hurts you with a tough matchup in London. And when you're looking at plays like this where teams that get rolled, I mean, it's going to be tough on you to actually pick up a win there.
Yeah, outside the DPS players, I think it's very unsettled for fantasy purposes as far as Philadelphia is concerned. I'm going to give us the next one here, and I'll take the lead, so you can't say anything too bad about my boys here. I'm going to talk about Raucus, and he came away with 13 points this week, and obviously not the performance you want. He's another one of those guys. You know, he's a really talented Zenyatta player. We expected him to play that role with Bonnie on the Mercy. Then Boink can come in for one of them when they want Lucio, but that's probably only King of the Hill anyways, right? So we didn't have a lot of concerns there, and he really didn't deliver. Another thing that's telling is Junkertown. We see Raucus play Bastion and still just 13 points. So on the overall, I'm not worried about Raucus. I think it was a rough week for Houston. They've got a lot of things to figure out in the coaching staff, in the substitution department. There's a bit going on there. But I think Raucus's playtime is pretty well set up. And there's easier matchups down the line here coming up for Houston. They're going to lead off this week. Well, we'll get into their matchups, but I mean, they got matchups against like Shanghai, stuff like that coming up, where they're going to have the opportunity to really stand out and get some points. So Raucus isn't going to be one of those top tier support players, but he's also going to be a safe bet. You know, if my whole brain now is going to work in live draft format because we just did one. So in my head, it's real, and it would be ridiculous to do it any other way. But we're pretty much the only ones to do that. So you'd want to like lean on him in the late rounds. You know, maybe have him as your second support. But for the most part, I'm no panicking on Raucus, but not a great week this week.
Yeah, and I'll let you take this next one because I know you have a personal attachment to playing this player.
Not to this player, really. Honestly, I mean, so Zupe is the player with negative 49 points. Oh, my attachment is I did it and I won, right? So it's a winning strategy to just roll out the absolute worst support player for the week and get the victory anyways. But that's it. Zupe, the worst support player, negative 49 points. So what happened here? And I think it's pretty obvious what happened is we all thought that, you know, okay, he's going to be the Zen player, and we're going to have Zebo playing the Mercy, and instead Florida decided to compound their problems by switching things up, putting Zupe on the Mercy, and like flipping him too. I don't even think it was consistent because Zebo is in the negatives as well. Both support players for the Florida Mayhem are a tire fire and run as far away from them as you possibly can.
Yeah, if we could put both supports for Florida in the feeder section, we would, because both of them had a combined almost negative 70 points. Yeah. Negative 70.
Absolutely brutal performance from them. Asmith, talk to us about this first DPS player here.
All right. This is one that completely fed because everybody thought we were going to see a lot of this guy. This dude's a superstar, Korean superstar rascal. You know how much playing time he got, Death? You want to know? He got none.
Same as his point.
None.
Zero.
0 points because he didn't even see the field, the screen. I think I'm going to see the screen. Stage. Okay, that sounds better. All right, he didn't see the stage, and that's just rough. I mean, I wouldn't bail on him just yet. You might want to stash him, but don't start him with confidence at all.
Yeah, so London, as I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail in a little bit, didn't stick to their script here. What they told us in the interview on the High Noon podcast or the High Noon Hot Seat, they said, we're going to keep the rosters together, alternate between the two of them, but we want to capitalize on that synergy and then work on mixing them. Instead, they decided to just shuffle the two decks together and see what comes out, and worked out pretty well for him, but a nightmare for people that were banking on and relying on the other half of this roster that did not play. The next player we're going to look at, another one of these Florida Mayhem players, and looking at it, it looks weird, right? Because we've talked about 13 points, 16 points, but we're talking about DPS players now. It's a different standard. Tavik only had 122 points. That's good for the 22nd overall DPS player, and that's somebody that I think at least two of the three of us, I had him up there pretty close, but I mean, you guys both, I think, had him in that number one overall consideration. Playtime is king, playtime is king. But
yeah.
when you get 0 Ford by the Boston Uprising, apparently bad stuff happens, and it doesn't look super good. What do we make of this going forward, A. Smith? What do you think of Tavik? How do you react to this 1 week?
They look in trouble. But Tavik, you're still going to start him, but you can't expect number one value out of Tavik. He's not a first-round pick anymore. It just doesn't look like he's your first-round go-to pick because Florida is such a tire fire. It's just rough.
Yeah, they had a bit of a tale of two teams scenario this past week. I really thought in their first matchup, and I'm blanking on the order, but in their first matchup, I thought they looked pretty good. Like Logic's, the story was okay. They're turning it around a little bit, and they were starting to get a little momentum going, and then it really just kind of never materialized. They went back to just making Logic's play Tracer and it not working, and when he was playing well, he was playing mostly Soldier and McCree, and they were going a little off meta, and I'm seeing a lot of teams hurting themselves in order to be meta when maybe it's best to just like play what you're best at to a certain extent. Like there's got to be a balance there, and I don't think these teams have found it yet. Nonetheless, you're still going to be starting this guy every single week in Tavik. You're just going to probably want him to be like your DPS 2 or your DPS 3 rather than, the main guy, the captain of your ship.
Exactly.
Talk to us about the last of the DPS players here.
The next DPS player here is one that is right behind Tavik in points, and that's your other franchise player that we thought would be a potential number one, first round pick, and that's Surefour. He only came away with 113 points. That's fewer than Asher, their Tracer player, and close to Hydration, who scored around in the 90s. So you're looking at Surefour, he played all but one map, and he just did not look the part of a first round pick. Surefour is another situation with Tavik that, I don't think he's going to be cleaning up as much as we thought. It looks like Asher is going to do more of the cleaning up on the kills, and Surefour may be doing the bulk of the damage or things like that. But in this league where kills matter, that's your problem.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there was not 100% playtime here for Surefour. Like I think
no, he set out a map.
Yeah, there was like Asher and Hydration for some amount of time, which hurts. It definitely hurts when you're looking at the scoring leaders and you're looking at these guys. You're talking about like 20 points being the difference between making it into the top 20. You know what I mean? So just a small amount of points on the scale can make a big difference in your overall standings, especially in DPS. So. Yeah, we're going to have to keep an eye on him. I kind of like him, though, as like a sleeper target, right? Like LA surprised me, looked better than I thought they would coming out of the gates. So I think there's a good chance they're going to get into a rhythm. And I just loved the flexibility they showed, the willingness to go to 3 DPS, stuff like that. Still makes me think Surefour has some upside. But
yeah. If you want to trade low on him, people start freaking out that he's at 23rd overall DPS, and you might be able to trade low and get him for a bargain.
Yeah, same thing with Tavik. You can make a trade like this, get him at bargain basement prices, and then they add some players in the acquisition window, and all of a sudden Florida's on a tear, and you've got yourself a serious player. So trades always really good to keep in mind. Basically, anytime somebody shows up in this feeders section, if you like them on the overall, like go throw a trade offer out there on them, because their owner has reason to be upset with their performance this week. That's why they're here. So maybe you can get a little extra value. Let's take a look at some of these flex players here. These two guys in particular, different stories, but very, very similar stories at the same time. I'll take Pine, number one. I mean, listen, probably the best 2 plays of the week belong to this guy, right? Like, I mean, he was just absolutely nutty bananas and showed the potential to be the number 1 skill player in the league this week. He showed MVP potential, everything you could possibly ask for, except for playtime. He comes in with 62 points, and he, like, hand-delivered 2 maps. Like, I firmly believe without Pine, if they would not have run Pine and would have kept Libero out there for that map, I think Houston would have taken that control point map off of New York. I mean, even with the clockwork decision, like, I mean, when you maybe it's just I'm overweighting the one play, but like they cleared out New York, right? And then there was like Pine and one other guy left, and then all the Houston players died because Pine went crazy. And he had many plays like that. So I'm very worried about Pine. In our draft, he actually fell quite a bit. It was not very surprising, and I missed him by 1 pick. Dang you, Invictus. But it was round 7 that he went, because we just don't know, right? But I think it was a steal there. We just wanted to get all the starters out of the way, like make sure you know who you're starting at DPS, and then he got snapped up really fast. Any thoughts on Pine, Asmith?
Pine had the highest points per 10 minutes in out of everybody. I think he only played 10 minutes because I think he had up to 60 points per 10 minutes, which is insane. But Pine is that good of a hit scan player. I mean, he's one of the best, if not the best, Widow in the league. And then you've got an amazing McCree. I mean, he's shown craziness on McCree, and you play him 2 maps. I mean, you could still play him and get more points out of the 2 maps he's going to play in a week. If that's what they stick with, you could still play him and get more than a support or a tank. So he's not out of the realm of not playable.
Yeah, he's kind of at that back end, right? Like at this point, if I'm going to play him next week, I'm going to view myself as really, really desperate. But one thing I do want to point out about Pine is New York had a very distinct advantage going into this week in that they only had to play on 4 different maps in the first week. So it's very possible that the other 4 maps in this pool right now are all Pine maps. And it just happened to line up this week that he only got in for 1 because that's how their plans were broken up. We don't know the full story on New York's roster decisions, more so than all the other teams, right? Because I'm pretty sure New York was the only one to just have the same map pool repeat for both of their matchups. So keep an eye out for that. It could be better than it looks like for Pine, but right now it looks like the team just kind of like, listen, this is a weird spot, right? Because of all the other substitution conversations, people brought in, obviously, to my eye, inferior talent to replace these guys. And that's not what New York did. They brought in a very, very solid libero. He did really, really well. He had a really strong week on the overall, but like, I mean, it was Pine, right? Like you're talking about somebody who's able to play at that top tier and compete at that top tier versus somebody who dictates play at that top tier and who you have to know everything about, his whereabouts, everything. If you lose him, you're dead. End of story. So I don't know. Keep an eye on that situation for New York. And Asmith talked to us about this last feeder here for the week.
All right. The last feeder of the week hits me close to home because I named one of my teams after him. My team name was Dia Miss Me Now, and it was Dia. 92 points. I mean, the dude guys showed so much promise on Widow. One of the highlights for the Shanghai roster. I mean, probably the biggest highlight for the Shanghai roster. And then you put him on Tracer the whole time. What are they doing? Obviously, they're feeding because look at the scores. They played like trash without him. Dia played bad. And hopefully this new coach they got coming in, the Miraculous Youngsters coach, will figure out this roster and put Dia where he needs to be put, because Dia will not get you nearly as many points on Tracer as he did with Widow and other characters. Dia did not look good. You've got to really fret if he was one of your top picks, because this whole Shanghai roster didn't look good, similar to how Tavik and Surefour were in that lineup. They didn't, they just didn't, especially Tavik, they didn't look good. And Dia, and even compared to his counterpart, Undead got 146 points, which is significantly higher than where Dia fell. And that just shows you how hard he fell with his switch to Tracer. It's a problem. Hopefully they fix it, but I can't imagine they're going to not put him on Widow at some point.
Yeah, it almost has to happen. Like a lot of these teams have to learn the aces in their places lesson, I think. And hopefully they're not stubborn, because it's going to hurt the overall product of the league. And unfortunately, my team's suffering from probably more than all the rest of them. So I'm really hoping they learn it soon. But yeah, we're looking at basically Undead playing the Widowmaker. And if you told me that you were going to switch the roles, right, I would have switched the points. I would have said, okay, well, I want Undead more than I want Dia then. But you looked like Dia was going to be a star in this league when we saw him on Widowmaker. And Undead had some plays. He popped off. I seem to remember a 3K in there somewhere, but like nothing like what we saw from Dia, who had like the most viewed clip from the preseason. Like his Widow play was absolutely phenomenal in the preseason, and we're not going to get to see that, it looks like, for a little while. So I'm a little sad about that. I think we all kind of lose on that front, and just his fantasy owners a little bit more.
Yep, that's totally fair.
So, Asmith, I want to then move us along here and talk about the week 2 lineups here for these teams. So a little bit different than last time. Obviously, Blevins isn't here, so you'll lead us off, or actually I'll lead us off. I'm going to talk about the Boston Uprising. We'll stay with the Atlantic Division, and then we'll go into the Pacific Division like last time. But one thing that was talked about, and I've already mentioned it, is how many different maps these teams play. Also, this week coming up, there's a little bit of a different wrinkle in the scheduling, and that's, this past time, everybody played in the first half, right? And then everybody played in the second half. That's not what we're going to see anymore. We're going to see players and teams have to kind of reset and play the very next day. And sometimes the very next match, not within the same day, but there's two scenarios here where somebody ends a day and then opens the next day. And I think that's going to be really, really interesting. Like, you have to have your plan in place for both matchups before you go into the first one. And I think that's really going to hurt these teams and give them just kind of a little something extra to fight against. And it's going to help bring out some interesting results. So we're going to start mentioning them. And if we think it factors in, we'll talk about it. But take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. These are stats we're monitoring, and we want to let you guys monitor them with us. We're not sure exactly how they'll impact things or how important they'll be. Like I said, though, we're going to start off week 2 with the Boston Uprising. They're going up against the Seoul Dynasty and the San Francisco Shock. Their map pool is 6 different maps, and they play on Friday and Saturday. So second half of the week here for Boston. And this is a team that, they are continuing to surprise, right? Like, they're not blowing the doors off anybody's power rankings. They're not doing anything super, super crazy, but they're slowly moving up, or teams are slowly falling behind them. In the case of Florida, I think is more what happened there. I'm done, Florida. You've burned me for the first and the last time. I won't forgive you for losing 4-0 to the Boston Uprising. But what Boston did show us, Asmith, is that they've got the ability to be really impactful when the matchup is there. They had some really, really good performances, and I don't necessarily have their players' numbers handy off the top of my head. Maybe you can help me out. I do know Dreamcasper with 180 points, and where was the other one here?
Dreamcasper and Striker had 183.
Yeah, right above them. So right there, number 13 and 14 in the DPS rankings, and probably pretty close to where we thought they'd be, right? We had some pretty good confidence that the DPS players on the lesser teams would be able to output a decent amount of points. And with Boston doing pretty well, I maybe would have expected them to jump up, right? A 4-0 win, I would have thought maybe they could have gotten a little bit higher, but they shared the load, right? Nobody really stood out amongst the two of them. And
well, you know who did get higher? Neko got higher with 83, second overall support.
Yeah,
he
Neko
cleaned up.
He did. He really cleaned up. So something to watch, when you've got those kind of free roll matchups. Maybe we're looking at Raucus next week, and how did he do against Shanghai? If they really clean up and they do really, really well in that matchup, and say 4-0, we want to look at that flex supports and say, okay, so when you've got an easy matchup, or when you're playing against one of these bottom tier teams, maybe we can keep an eye on that flex support player and his point total. See if that carries over, because I don't necessarily think Neko's going to repeat and be a number 2 support player or anything like that. Like we said, Jae Hong's not on that list, but he is number 6 and ready to get back in there, just 1 point away from the top 5. But other guys that underperformed, Boombox, Sleepy, stuff like that, these are all guys that I think Neko is going to give way to over time. So don't overvalue Neko going into this week, but play the DPS players with confidence. I think you can safely roll out Gamzu. I think he's a startable option. I'm not going to put him in the top 5 category yet.
He is a very startable position.
He seems to be viable so far, but I really want to see what happens when Boston meets the test of Seoul, and what happens to these tank players when they're going to be having that problem of just a vastly superior matchup. But the other matchup's not too bad here. San Francisco Shock should be exploitable for them. They didn't really live up to their preseason hype that they gave us in week 1, so I think people are kind of back to the drawing board on San Francisco and looking for a spot for them, and the conversation shifts back to how many can we steal before our roster unlocks, and then we can try to make a go for it. Will they still be in shouting distance of the playoffs? Anything I missed here about the Boston Uprising players? Play your DPS players, use Neko if you want, but
yeah, the only thing I would mention would be Kalios and Note. They split time, and Kalios actually ended up with the more time and the more points. Someone who I would I would look at, but I don't know if since he's a flex. Calio is listed as a flex player. I don't think you're going to want to start him over DPS in your starting position, but I would definitely hold off on someone like Note.
Yeah, they flipped the script a little bit. Note led preseason play time, and now Kalios has it. Because Note does have that tank description, I'm very comfortable owning Note, but I just put him on the back bench. I don't view him as somebody that maybe I can start if I ignored tank for a while. I would be looking to address it if I had Note. Going to be some very, very small point totals from him, I think, coming up. But over time, I think he's got a good chance to kind of take over that job. He's somebody that was off the radar when he got signed and then overperformed. So I think they might keep trying to work him in and look for some opportunities. It's telling to me that he got in there at all in the first week.
Definitely. All right, we're going to move on to the next one then. That'd be the Florida Mayhem. Okay. Mayhem played against, they got, oh my gosh, they look so bad this last week. But who they've got this week, they have the pinnacle of the league, and then they have the bottom of the league. They've got Seoul Dynasty in their first game, and then they play the Shanghai Dragons in their second game. You can expect pretty much a roll for the first game, and they're probably not going to put up many points. The second game, you're actually going to see how they compete against a team that looks to be on their level. You might get to see Tavik and Logix really start to pop off, and Tavik maybe earn his points that the reason you drafted him. They play 7 different maps, and they play a Wednesday, Friday, so they play it kind of really spread out. So I'm not 100% sure if that's going to matter too much. But look to actually, I would venture to say that you might actually get more points out of the Florida lineup because they have a matchup in Seoul or in Shanghai. Now playing Seoul, I almost expect Seoul to play starters or play bench players in this lineup because it looks such like an easy game. So you might actually get a little more competitive than what you're expecting. You're expecting a complete roll. Which means you would get like what Shanghai numbers looked like last week. It could be any number of that, but I would venture to say that Logix, Tavik, you're still going to play them. I actually think they may get more points this week than they did last week with Shanghai in the lineup there.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add here is that I'm not willing to call Shanghai a good matchup for Florida. I really think they looked so bad against Boston, who, as much as they're surprising and as much as they're improving, I don't know. It's just, I'm not going to give Florida any. Matchup. I'm not. It's the best possible matchup for them for sure because I've still got them. But I mean, we're talking about 11 versus 12, and I'm not sold. I've got it right.
If you're going to 5 maps, you're probably going to get more points. I mean, look at Dallas. Both games were really competitive, close games. And competitive, close games, you end up getting more points because the games drag out because they're close and they go longer. So the longer the game goes, the more potential, especially your DPS, get of getting kills.
Well, I'm also not sure it's close between these two. As not sure as I am about who's going to win, I'm not sure about who would be like the 4-0. I wouldn't even be surprised if it ends that way for one of them or the other because it's got to be kind of stressful at this point, right? And there's going to be some number of teams that kind of buckle under it. And, we've maybe seen a little bit of it already and unfortunately in our teams. But, at these teams that are also at the bottom of the standings right now, but I think expected to stay there, it might be even a little bit worse for them. But yeah, so we'll have to wait and see. Basically, the winner gets 11 and the loser gets 12. And I think just about everybody's power rankings at the end of that matchup. I'm going to move things on. And again, we're both going to do this. We're going to steal the conversation about our teams so that we can frame it in a way that makes us feel okay about the conversation. But the Houston Outlaws they've got that matchup, right? They've got the Shanghai Dragons here. So this is one I think they can win regardless of whether they continue to make their substitution errors or their substitution decisions, whether or not you want to concede that they're errors or not. If you don't want to concede that they're errors, I would really advise you to A, watch the matches, and B, look at the stats. So Houston only plays on 5 different maps, much less than 8 this time. So they get a little bit of a chance to kind of focus in. Unfortunately, though, they're on a short timeline here because both their matchups are at the very beginning here. They actually close out the first day on Wednesday, and then they open up on Thursday, right there at 5 p.m. Eastern. So the second matchup is against Dallas, and man, I would say personally, I would favor Dallas here. I'm not even going to lie, because I think when Dallas makes their substitution errors, they do it with a higher level of play when it comes in. So even if both teams continue to, and Dallas was less of a, issue with making mistakes with substitutions as they were, I think, just kind of tilting a little bit. They're not used to losing, and when the second match got away from them against the Valiant, they let it get away from them. They just continued to provide unforced errors. I guess I'm going to use a baseball term. I don't feel comfortable with it, but unforced errors it is. The back cap from Soon, things like that, just that didn't need to happen, that just kind of made things worse for Dallas. I would not be surprised if Houston won this one off the back of the tilt that Dallas is going through right now. Maybe they're just trying to get a feel for it. Taimu, despite his positive mental attitudes, Twitch spam, is known to tilt, and Effect gave a little bit of a candid look in his stream, and somebody went and translated everything, and he basically said, yeah, we tilted, like it was a problem. They didn't react positively and well, and it's going to be really important for teams to do that here, because they could have gone out and won that Numbani map and been in a better situation with tiebreakers. Now they're actually behind teams like Houston in tiebreakers, and that could be really, really relevant. It's a small sample size, but it's all we've got. Houston was more competitive within their games and therefore won more maps. I believe that's accurate, right? Because didn't Dallas have a draw?
Yes.
It's close, but I think Houston has like another extra map or two.
Dallas won 1 map total. They drew 2 maps.
Gotcha. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, so those draws are going to make things goofy, but you got to find a way to get in there, right? It's disappointing as a Houston fan to lose to the Philadelphia Fusion in their opener, but at the same time, we went to 5, right? We've got 2 map wins out of it. It was as good of a loss as there can possibly be in the grand scheme of things, and stuff like that. It may be irrelevant, but it also could be your entire season once it gets into the playoffs. So I don't know, getting away from the topic a little bit here, but the Houston players on the overall Linkser had a really, really good performance. I thought he actually did really well in the Pine battle, right? When that came down to Widow and on Ruins, it was the rest of the team that didn't do much for Houston. But I thought Linkser did a good job of at least keeping Pine in check while his tanks weren't able to really help him, dove too deep one time, stuff like that. But on the overall, I thought Linkser did really well. And considering he lost time, right? There was times he sat out and maps that he sat out. I think that will stop happening at least as often, and won't be every match we play, Linkser's going to sit at least 1 map. I really hope that stops happening. But also I think it does stop happening. I just thought his Tracer performance on Dorado was better than Clockwork's Tracer performance at any point when he came in. He just seemed to have a better feel for the hero to me, and I really hope and think the team will eventually get there, even if it takes a little while. We've got a long season, and in the meantime, Linkser's doing just fine. Jake as well, I'm blanking a little bit off the top of my head as to where exactly he was.
He was 11th, 10th best.
Okay, yeah, so Linkser was in 8th, and then Jake was in 10th. So both players put up top 10 performances. Really nothing to worry about there. And again, that's both of them missed some time. Jake had some up and down performances on his Farah, but I think that'll get better as it's called for more often, and he's kind of got to use it. It'll get him some more game time practice, and these guys I think will both improve and finish the year better than they're currently at right now. I think they're gonna, on the overall, both be, Linkser a top 3 DPS player and Jake a top 5, probably not top 5, but top 10. It all depends on the meta with Jake, right? Because he's so good on Junkrat, and if he can stay in the meta, he'll be really, really strong all season. If Junkrat falls away because of the upcoming change, even though it seems minor, it could hurt him. We'll have to wait and see. But at least through the stage where we kind of know what the meta is and are getting a feel for it, I think both guys will be automatic starts. The tank players were kind of average, right? They were kind of just okay. I thought they got outperformed by Fraggy and Poco, not from a fantasy standpoint, but from an eyeball standpoint, an eyeball test. But on the overall, I think they're going to be fine. This team is hurting themselves and handicapping themselves right now with their substitutions. They look like a worse team after they make them. And I think that problem's going to resolve itself in time, whether it's by the substitutions get better and they perform better with them because they're more used to them, or they learn their lesson and stop substituting them. Whatever way it goes, I don't have too much of an issue with Muma or Cool Matt being considered top 10 tank options. Supports, though, I guess. Yeah, we talked about Raucus. You can probably play him. He's got that Shanghai matchup, but you probably don't want to be relying on him too heavily. Thoughts on Raucus and anything I might have missed here with the Outlaws conversation?
I think Cool Matt looked bad in the first game, and I think Cool Matt kind of woke up the second game, even though the team did probably worse overall in the second game. Cool Matt did better. He looked to wake up and do a lot better. I think Cool Matt's going to be a top tank. He with his diva play, he tends to get diva tends to get more kills than a Winston. Not saying always, but in some cases, in a lot of cases, especially the way Cool Matt and Muma play, I think Cool Matt's going to end up getting more kills, and he'll probably be the better tank for fantasy purposes.
And the ultimate is just like a points lightning rod when they use it.
It can be, yeah. Yep, for sure.
Talk to us about London, Asmith.
All right, London. This is my problem with London. You love any team they're going to play. They actually have a really, really difficult matchup, next two matchups. But as we were saying with Dallas last week, difficult matchups are a good thing, because I don't think London's going to get rolled in either of these matchups, meaning these matchups will either go well for London or they will go long, therefore getting more points. They're playing Dallas and the LA Valiant, both good matchups for them. I think they're favored in both, but I think they will be close and they will determine a lot in the power rankings. The problem with London, when they played, the 6 players they played, all of them were near the top of the board, period. In whatever category they were in, all of their players were near the top. The problem is, I'm not sold that London's going to start those 6 players again. Rascal is too good to sit on the bench the whole time. I don't think they're going to do that. I wouldn't be surprised to see the other 6 players in the game in some facet this next week. Now, I also wouldn't be surprised if they just rolled out those 6 and then continued. So right now, anything London does, I'm not going to be surprised, because I have no idea what they're really going to do. If you do play a player from London and you're lucky and they play, they're going to do well. I would play them, but I would also be very cautious, and hopefully that you don't roll a 0 like you did with Rascal, because that is a valid concern.
Yeah, and I think this is a conversation that you can really change depending on whether or not you won or lost in the first week, right? Like if you won and you like did it because you played Badosin and he obviously did super well for you, like roll him out again. You might as well, right? Like worst case scenario, you have a down week like so many people had in the first week, and you're kind of like back to broken even, and you learned something, and now you know that it's really iffy and you need to move on. But I mean, they all just did so well, right? That I think you just roll out the 6 that just played and take the chance that, you know, they're going to be the same 6, because even if they do roll out a different 6, there's still a decent chance that one player, right? Like that, especially like a tank or a support, like a Badosin, he might just stay in over Hago and not go in, and Hago might just never come in, and he could be the one that stays. You never know. You've kind of also got that chance. So it's like better than 50-50. It's probably like 75-25 that they're going to play.
But how many people had Badosin? Because, you know, Badosin didn't even play in preseason. Well, Hagopen was in the whole time during preseason, so people would have just assumed that he was going to be the starter because of everything for preseason, and then you see this week 1 and you're, oh my gosh. Don't lose your mind over how well they all did. You want to see week 2 and see what they do for their lineup. If you have them, I'd be happy, but if you don't, I wouldn't fret playing against them.
Yeah, and if somebody does something silly like drops, you know, a Rascal or something like that, one of these guys, pick them up, because it's still very, very undecided what's going to go on, and the mandated roster spots will really lead people to be forced to drop the DPS players that maybe didn't start this week and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of value in the free agency pool in the next couple of weeks here moving forward.
Sure.
The next team let's talk about here is the New York Excelsior. They have matchups here against the LA Valiant and the LA Gladiators. So they're taking a tour of Los Angeles. They're going to be not very well received, I don't think, in the Blizzard Arena this week. So they'll have the ire of the crowd going against them. But they have 6 different maps to play on, and they're playing on, this is Thursday and Saturday. So they got a little bit of a spacing out there between the matchups. They'll have a chance to kind of reset and come into the Gladiators match. I like the order of these matchups for them. I think they need to work a little harder to beat the Valiant than they do the Gladiators right now. So we'll get that kind of opportunity to see them over prepare for the tougher matchup. I think that's going to be really, really important. Teams will probably focus on the matchup right in front of them and then do what they can for the second one. That would be kind of the direction I'd lean. They can always make the decision to go the other way, but New York's a good enough team. They should be able to assume they can and do everything they can to beat both opponents equally, this week. So I really like all these guys. Bench Pine, you don't really have any reason to throw him out there. I would stay away from Janice, and who's he splitting with? It's one of these names. Mano. Okay, it's Mano and then Meko, and we were talking about it during the draft, how many guys have similar names, gets us confused, but stay away from the Mano Janice conversation for now. They're still splitting time. I'm not 100% sure you want to start either of them, and if you do want to start one of them, we don't know which one it is yet, but Meko did really, really well. He had a phenomenal week. The very top, I think, of the scoring leaders here for tanks. He was number 4, so a really, really strong week from Meko. Over 100 points. Any tank that can give you over 100 points is definitely worth playing. He didn't do any time splitting, so I think Meko's going to end up being the top fantasy tank to come out of the New York Excelsior. I feel fairly confident in that, so by all means play him. And again, on the overall, I think Diva players, I think we all kind of expected them to be the better of the 2 different tanks, but I think they were better than we even thought they would be as far as just sheer point totals. So definitely very happy to play Meko. Libero's kind of an interesting spot, Asmith. I'm wondering what you think. I'm kind of shying away from him where possible for now, but as long as they seem to have this like pseudo BM strategy of like just save Pine for no reason. Like, yeah, he's a god. Yeah, he could win it single-handedly on his own. I'm just going to kind of bench Libero until we have a larger sample size to tell me that it's perfectly safe.
Like, I have Libero in, I think I have him in either 2 of the 3 or all 3 leagues that I'm in right now. And I'm going to play him. I think right now they haven't shown you enough. And when Libero's in, he does well. I mean, he had 159 points. That gives him the 16th best spot in there. That's a top 2. That's a second, a second string DPS. That's a startable position. Even if he's down a map or 2, he's still going to play. Even if you take 2 more maps away from him, he's still going to get more points than players like Hydration or Agilities or players that your fringe picks. So I'd still start him because you've got 4 players on the bench. Unless you have a deep DPS lineup, I'd play him.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to imagine. I'm looking at my lineup from the draft. Again, my whole brain is just going to work around this draft that we just did, and nothing else. Yeah, nothing else is going to make any sense. But looking at it, like, I don't know that I would squeeze him into mine. But it would be definitely pretty tough. He's right on the edge. I would rather play Libero than a tank. You know what I mean? Like, then play somebody outside the DPS role for sure. But I just think, considering how good the team is and how much of the playing time he got, I think people are going to be very eager to play him. And there's going to be some lineups out there for sure where it might not be 100%, a no-brainer decision. Moving along, though, talk to us about my new arch nemesis, the Philadelphia Fusion.
The Philly Fusion were a team that nobody knew what was going to look like. No one had any idea because they didn't even show up for preseason. But boy, when they showed up, they came with everything they got and took it to Houston. They looked good. Carpe and Shadowburn are big-time players. They are both starting players for your DPS roles if you've got them. Carpe and Dreamcast, and Carpe and Shadowburn are both top tier players. And Fraggy really did not look good, man. And Fraggy was a player that I'm not looking at. But they do have favorable matchups in San Francisco and LA Gladiators. I would venture to say both of those are favorable matchups for them. And so if you've got them, if you've got Shadowburn and Carpe, I think they're both going to be in the top I think they're both going to end up top 10 DPS this week with the matchup they've got, because they're going to be competitive matchups, but they're going to be competitive matchups that they should win. And that's a good recipe for points for DPS players. Fraggy, if you've got him, bench him. If you have him, bench him. Because of how aggressive he is, he's going to get picked off first a lot. And that's going to really hurt you in points. He's going to die a lot because he's so aggressive. Sure, he'll get kills, but his kills aren't going to match up for his deaths. And I would bench him, especially if you have a startable startable tank there. Their flex players, Boombox really did not impress. He looked good the first game, but the second game he looked really off. And so Boombox is a player that I would want to. I feel comfortable he's going to do fine in this week's matchups, so I would start him. Don't freak out because he had one bad game against the London Spitfire. They're a really good team.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing I will say about Philly is I think we're going to see things when everything opens up, like they'll continue to get better. I think they're kind of what we thought they were going to be going in, right? Mm-hmm. They just showed a little bit more ability to flash, I think, than we thought they would against Houston, but they were so bad against London that it really makes me think they said, okay, we've got 1 week to get ready for this. Let's focus on the one we've got the best chance to win. They kind of focused all their preparation time on the Houston map pool and the lineup, the lineup there, and the opposing team review, the film review they did, I think was really centered around Houston. It was like two completely different teams. It was like they showed up, they were super impressive against Houston, and then they disappeared. And like outside of one really cool triple mind play from Shadowburn, did like next to nothing. But yeah, the DPS players are automatic fire-ups. If you're redrafting or if you're setting a lineup for a new league or anything like that, I think definitely consider Shadowburn to be considerably higher than his DPS counterpart, just because Snillo comes back at some point during the season. And Philly's a team with a really deep bench, right? And I don't see them taking Shadowburn out almost ever, right? So I would lean that they would take out Carpe.
I don't think they're going to take out Carpe either, to be honest.
Snillo's
good, but Carpe is ridiculous. Carpe looked insane on Tracer against.
He looked super good, and I hope
Carpe
you're right.
Looked like the best Tracer out there, period. He looked better than every Tracer that Houston threw out there. I don't think Snillo's better than him. And Carpe is rumored to have one of the highest contracts in the Overwatch League. You're going to start that player.
I completely don't disagree with you, but I just don't think we can discount the possibility of it. Like, right? Like I think you have to put Shadowburn a little bit higher in your rankings, just because we've already seen how many teams kind of, in our opinion, mismanage the substitutions to varying degrees. But in fantasy, time off is time off, and it's always bad. So something to keep in mind. You're still going to want to draft Carpe. I would just keep Shadowburn just a little higher ahead. Moving us along into the Pacific Division, and let's try to pick up the pace if we can a little bit here, Asmith. Yeah. I don't know how long we've been going, but I just always assume we're running long. Starting us off with the LA Gladiators. Had kind of an impressive first couple of maps here, but now they go up against the Philadelphia Fusion, who they got definitely a solid chance here in that one, no doubt about it. But they also have the New York Excelsior, and I don't see them being able to pull that one out. So definitely a negative matchup. And then kind of a neutral one, let's call Philly for now, since they're two completely different teams and we don't really know. So let's kind of call it a minor negative matchup. But one thing that's telling here is LA's got the 8 different maps to worry about. They don't have anything repeating. So the second match against New York could be really, really ugly, depending on how they decide to prioritize things. And they play on Thursday and Saturday. So they do have a little bit of a space out here. Listen, I'm firing up Shaz. I'm not as sold about Bishu, I think, as a lot of people are, but we'll talk about that a little bit more going forward in a later segment of the show. The DPS players split a little bit. There was some rotation there. I didn't see a lot of the 3 DPS, so I'm still kind of keeping those guys at the bottom of the list as far as DPS that I want to have and I want to play. You know, I still do want to have these guys. I'd rather play them than a tank, a support, or a flex for the most part. But they're definitely not really kind of popping off in the same way that, you know, other guys are in questionable matchups. Linkser had a better day. He missed time, all, you know, things like that. So I keep them in mind and continue to use them with confidence. But if they're kind of your top tier DPS player, then maybe you want to consider trying to look for a trade or something along those lines. You might be in a little trouble. Asmith, talk to us about your boys, the Dallas FOWL.
Dallas, I love my FOWL, but man, they did not end up doing nearly as well as we thought in terms of score. Now, in terms of fantasy, they looked pretty good. They had two top, the number 4 and number 5 overall DPS players in Taimu and Effect, and they had the 3rd best support player in Harry Hook playing, and that's really good for them. I said last week that they were going to have good when they have tough matchups. It's good for fantasy. Tough matchups are good. Competitive matchups are good for fantasy because you're going to have high scoring. And that's what they've got this week with Houston and London. I don't know who's making these schedules, but come on, Dallas has had the hardest first 4 games out of anybody, period. But that's a good thing for fantasy purposes. I don't think you're going to see as crazy of subs. I think they're going to try to go back to the basics. Not 100% sure in that. I'd say London probably a little bit of a negative. Houston a positive matchup, but I think both ways. I think they're going to be competitive. I don't think they're going to get rolled in either match. I think they're going to be long matches. I think that's good for fantasy. Effect, Taimu, they're going to be 2 of the top fantasy GPS, period. I think you really want to look at them in the league I just drafted. If I had 4th pick and I took Effect. Effect is that good of a player. I think you really want to look at him at starting, period. Taimu as well. Taimu may have off games, but Effect doesn't look to have off games, period. They've got 5 maps, which is better for them this week. They do play Thursday and Friday. I think they're going to come back a lot stronger. I think you're going to see a better FOWL team.
Yeah, I think basically all the disappointing teams, I think, are going to continue to improve going forward. Dallas definitely no exceptions. And like you said, kind of dead even on the matchups. Like they're a slight to moderate favorite against Houston and a slight to moderate underdog against London. So everything should wash out. They should do just fine. Harry Hook is a lock and load automatic support option. And I think Chipsajin is a really, really great bench option.
Do you know if they're playing Junkertown?
I don't off the top of my head. Maybe we'll get a little more comprehensive with
if they're playing Junkertown, that's a definite start for Harry. If they're not playing Junkertown, I would be a little more hesitant on Harry than I would for other times.
He did boot up the Bastion, which is definitely going to be good for him if he continues to do that. What I will say, though, is he was picking up DPS in plenty of other scenarios as well. So I don't have any major concerns either way for him. I think even if he was on support players the whole time, like he'd still be a really viable option. The San Francisco Shock this week are going up against the Philadelphia Fusion and the Boston Uprising. They've got 5 different maps to worry about, and they both open and close the week. So the very, very first match of the week on Wednesday and the very, very last match of the week on Saturday. That, to me, I think is actually a really big bonus here for this team, right? Like they get to take like 1 break for Boston's other game to like watch that footage go on live and like maybe go into the arena to check that out. But otherwise they get to basically prepare for Philadelphia independently, not worry at all about the Boston Uprising, and then finish their match and immediately go into the classroom and start looking at the new maps. They don't have a ton of differences there, so there's only 1 map difference. Maybe that night after they open the first round of games. They go review the one different map, then they can just spend a day or two watching tape on Boston, things like that, and then really just scrim and get some reps in, so they can kind of treat it like 2 different weeks here. So I'm expecting good things from San Francisco this week. We've talked about Philadelphia has 7 different maps this week. We don't know who they are. I could see San Francisco coming out of this with 2 victories out of this week. So anybody I was willing to play from San Francisco, I'm very willing to play this week.
Yeah.
I kind of talked myself out of maybe using Nevix in a situation later on in the show for the new Douse the Flame segment we're going to talk about, partially because these matchups are so good for them, and the situation is really well set up for San Francisco. So Baby Bay, no doubt, locked and loaded, ready to go. Really anybody on their team, like I said, if you're planning on using them, or if you were, if they're your penciled in starter, I think they're locked and loaded, ready to go this week. Anybody in particular you want to talk about? Sleepy had kind of a bad week, Smith. Any thoughts on him?
Sleepy had a bad first game against Valiant, and then he had a good second game. I think he bounced back pretty well, but overall, I think, Sleepy was a disappointment overall. He ended up with 42 fantasy points, and he had only like 5 or something really low to start. So I think he just had a bad game. I think Sleepy's going to be fine. I wouldn't worry about him.
Yeah, I think basically whatever you drafted him to be, or whatever your roster says he is, you can still use him for now.
Exactly.
That's kind of my big theme this week across all the shows we're going to do. It's like, calm down, don't panic, don't overreact to the 1 week, small sample size, big stage, crazy circumstances that these guys all just played under. Your first instinct is probably closer than your knee-jerk overreaction to what you just saw this weekend.
Exactly.
So I'm kind of not moving anybody too much on the overall, unless like somebody like Pine, where the playtime was just drastically different, or Dia, who's on a completely different role than we thought, stuff like that. But talk to us about the LA Valiant here. They had a really, really strong week. I think their fans are really, really excited. Bit of a tough matchup slate here this week.
Super excited right now, and they might come away this week really disappointed. They're playing 2 of the full Korean rosters in London and New York, and it's going to be really tough. Soon popped off, and I mean seriously popped off. He was the 2nd overall scoring player, period. He had 300 fantasy points, which is more than 3 tanks combined. So let's just think about that for a second, okay? But don't expect this next week for him to put up that kind of points. That's a lot. He's got a tough matchup, and I venture to say they might go long, but there's also a possibility that they end up getting rolled and they end up doing very poor. The tanks did really, really well. Fate and Envy were both your 2 top scoring tank and your top scoring flex player. I don't foresee them to score nearly as many points this next week. I would definitely slow it a little bit there, and don't overreact. Like Death was saying, don't overreact with, they did amazing, start all the Valiant. Unfortunately, both 2 of the 3 leagues I played in this week had majority Valiant players, and so since they all did amazing, I ended up with playing against the top scoring teams. But I don't foresee next week them doing as well.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a slow your roll scenario there
On the
for
whole
the LA
team.
Weekend players. Yeah, the whole team across the board, but we'll talk a little more specifically about one, maybe 2 of them in later segments here. That they're going to have to be pretty rapid fire. I don't know. Maybe I'm completely off about time, but it feels like we're going pretty long. Soul Dynasty, here's the second last team that we've got to talk about. Not a ton to talk about with these guys. They're going against Florida and Boston. They're going to cruise. The question is, they played Kooky over Miro, which definitely hurt me in at least one league where I was kind of hoping for Miro to lead the charge as far as tank points go. So the question about Soul becomes, how do they kind of balance the playtime for everybody? I don't think Fleta's coming out. I think they like that people are calling him the MVP. I think they want to keep that conversation going. He's the only one that I feel very, very confident he won't be subbed out in any capacity, obviously, other than the supports, because they've only got 2 supports. But yeah, I think you just kind of roll out your starters, your Fletas, your Munchkins, leave the other guys on the bench for now. No real reason to do anything risky. You know, this is the week where they're going to play those guys if they're going to, and the conversation will get really ugly with them if like Fleta doesn't play in either of these two and then they win. Like, things are going to get really, really weird for the Soul players. But for the most part, there was a very clear division. It was Fleta's by far the best, Munchkin is by far the second best, and the rest of them are super risky plays, and you should probably just stay away. Asmith, talk to us about the Shanghai Dragons. You're going to have that exciting assignment a lot of these weeks.
The Shanghai Dragons, they're so exciting to talk about. Let me tell you, just stay away from Shanghai. Just don't even go there. I mean, unless you have Dia or Undead, I would really not even sure to ever think about playing Shanghai Dragons until they can prove us otherwise. They've got Houston and Florida would be probably the best matchup they could possibly have, and that could be a good thing. But I could also foresee them getting 4-0'd in both matches and it being another super ugly week for Shanghai. And so I venture to say you stay away from them. You start Dia if you have to, if you don't have any other DPS or maybe even a high tier tank that you could start over him or a flex, then you start Dia and you start Undead. But other than that, you kind of stay away. I venture to keep him on the bench. Stay away.
Yeah, Undead I view as a viable DPS 3, Dia as a viable DPS 4, but in ideal scenarios, you're going to have 4 DPS inside the top 30 or something like that. Like that, you know, those are going to be your better
ideally,
lineups.
Yeah.
So there's going to be opportunities for you to sit those guys. If you have them in the league we just drafted, I've got Dia. He's not going to be playing because I have enough depth, and unless something crazy happens with like Bird Ring, there's just not going to be any reason to really consider it. So let's move along here. Asmith finally got through the matchups. Now we can talk about sleepers here as we kind of round out the show. These are much more fast-paced segments, so please do bear with us. They should be kind of rapid fire, but
yeah. I'd like to take a subtle moment to brag that all 3 of my sleepers last week were higher than everybody else's. My sleepers were really good, so
yeah, I do think you picked them first, so you crossed them off the list. I don't know, it was me or you picked them first, and I think it might have even depended on which one. But either way, we're going to keep that going because you outperformed. You outperformed, you get to pick first again, so it's going to be difficult for us to unseat you in these positions. But who do you got for tanks here, A-Smith?
Sleeper, I think tank-wise, you've got Cool Matt. Cool Matt did not have a great week for tanks overall. He ended up number 9, which in an 8-league team is not a starter. I think he's going to bounce back. I think he's going to do well. He ended up playing a good second match. His second match was a lot better than his first, and I think Cool Matt's kind of getting used to the stage, and he's going to do well. He's going to bounce back. Play Cool Matt if you got him.
Yeah, the team's really going to stabilize around him, if not this week, over time. So just a general, like, don't worry too much about this guy note is definitely good. I'm going to go with Coco here, and the reason is, and it's a risky one, right? This is a sleeper for if you're, like, really desperate. Like, maybe you had Fissure lined up or something like that as your starter. I know I've got situations where I thought Fissure was going to be the starter in London, and now he's just not playing, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have a tank at all anymore. Coco's a guy that, it looks like he's going to get some play time throughout the week, right? So he's going to contribute in some capacity. He's a passive Reinhardt style tank, so he's not going to be aggressive like Fraggy, die a whole bunch. And also, if things snowball a little bit here on Dallas, they might really just revert back to what they've been running and not really use their subs and just go, okay, let's just bring in the Envious 6-stack to get things back under control and get the team stabilized, and then make small adjustments from there once they've got a little bit of their momentum back. So digging a little deeper for Coco there, but if you're looking at a sea of options that you don't really want to start, Coco's one that maybe has some upside and also has a bit of a safe floor. A-Smith, hit us up with your support sleeper of the week.
A support sleeper of the week, and I pick this guy because he was number 11 total support, and that's Boombox. I think Boombox is going to bounce back. He had, like I said, he had a really, really rough game against London. He had a pretty good game in the first game, so I think Boombox will bounce back from this. He's a great fragging Zen. You want fragging Zens in that support role. I'd venture to start him in this week.
Yeah, for my support sleeper here, man, at some point we're going to have to use Sleepy just because he's like perfect for the sleeper designation. Yeah, it's too easy of a choice. But I'm going to go with Raucous this time around. Listen, that matchup against Shanghai just kind of takes all your doubts and all your worries and kind of gets rid of them, right? And I think I'm actually double checking it right now just so that I can tell you definitively whether or not they're going to be playing on Junkertown. But Junkertown was a bastion scenario for this guy, and they are against Shanghai. They're going to be playing on Junkertown. So I think that's a really good opportunity for Raucous just to rack up like 35 points right there. I mean, it might not go down that way, but it could very easily go down that way at the exact same time. We saw like the support leaderboard right now is kind of like in turmoil here as Neko sits at number 2. Why? In large part because he had some easy matchups. So I think some cake matchups here will be what cures a lot of the problems here for some of these flex supports that underperformed in the first week. And I'm going to lean on Raucous this week like nothing happened last week. How about we're going to lump DPS and flex together here for because when we're talking about sleepers, we're talking about really deep. So you're already going to have, your headliner DPS player locked into your lineup. So really flex or DPS can work. So who do you got here for the DPS flex sleeper?
Yeah. This will be a player that you want to slide in maybe in your 4th spot if you don't have 4 good DPS players. I like Nevix again. He popped off last week. He put up 114 points, which is really well, and I really like their matchups this week. They've got Philly and Boston. I think both of those are going to be good matchups for him. I think Nevix is going to continue to do well and frag. At least this week, I would say you can slide him in, and he's probably going to end up doing better than some of your bottom tier starting DPS. So I think he might actually be a sleeper pick to end up putting up a lot of points for you.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with one that I'm going to be using a lot, and I'm going to be taking my own advice a ton on this week. I thought Agilities would get a little bit more playtime than he did in the first week. Silk Thread really seemed to kind of dominate the playtime argument a little bit. But with that said, when Agilities was in there, he performed really, really well. And he put up just under 100 points, which for a guy that played like 2, maybe 3 maps, I think, guessing off the top of my head, but it wasn't many, he put up a sizable point total here. I think that's better than rolling out, a top tier, a really, really talented. Like he beat Jaehong, for example, and he played a fraction of maps as opposed to the 100% playtime that Jaehong had. So this is just me basically reminding you that this guy's there, reminding you that he's a viable option and probably better than, in that 4th flex spot using a tank player or a support player. Just roll out the DPS, especially when the matchups are pretty good, but Valiant looks pretty good. So even in these bad matchups, I think there's a good chance for Agilities to do some work and build up some points.
Sure.
Moving on here, the second last segment, we've got Douse the Flames. This is where we basically take somebody that like won the week for you and really, really overperformed last week and just tell you to calm down and don't overreact to it. Like sometimes crazy things happen, and we're going to try to help you guys identify these crazy things throughout each of these weeks as we go through the regular season and maybe keep you from making a mistake the following week. Asmith, again, we'll let you lead off here. Talk to us about tanks. Who you dousing the flames on?
Here's the deal. My Douse the Flames section is going to lean a little heavily, but it's going to be Gesture for the tanks. Gesture was amazing. He played really, really well. He put up 119 points for a tank. That's really good. Gesture, if you had played against somebody who didn't have a tank, and you probably could have racked up a lot more points and ended up winning because of Gesture. He played really well. However, you've got to remember, London has this other player, tank player called Fisher, and he's really good as well. You have no idea if they're going to roll out with the same 6 next week. I would douse the flames a little bit. I'm not saying drop Gesture, but I'm saying taper back a little bit because he might end up sitting the bench and getting you a 0.
Yeah, maybe it's one of those situations where a Muma, a Cool Mat, a Miro, somebody that underperformed his point total last week, is a better start. And a lot of people might make that kind of initial overreaction and say, oh, this week happened. And like you said, if we get 2 more weeks into the season and Gesture hasn't come out and Fissure's on the bench, then yeah, he's a top 3 guy, locked and loaded, ready to go. But for the time being, protect yourself. Play the guys that you know are going to play. I would rather guarantee myself, the 85 to 90 points that one of the Outlaw tanks give me than go, but Gesture gives me 120 if he's in for every single map. That's kind of still not the safest odds at the moment. My tank that I want to kind of douse the flames on a little bit here is Bishu. Listen, he had a really, really good week this week, performed really, really well. He was number 2 for tanks, right? And I don't think we can really consider him that. I think he's still below the Outlaw tanks. I think he's still below, obviously, Miro, who, would have been, if you just double his points, he would have been 144 and in 3rd place. So, being benched for Kuki hurt him some, obviously. But, think of Bishu more along the lines of like above iRemix, maybe kind of in that cool mat conversation, but I would still kind of maybe lean Muma a little bit. That's one of the few tank combos, the Houston guys, even though we're not talking about them, where I think the Winston has a little more upside than the Diva player, just by play style. Like Matt's big plays are huge epic saves, and those don't show up in fantasy. He's even got a couple of those in week 1. Make sure you're checking out the clips if you haven't seen them. But yeah, I'm going to say calm down a little bit on Bishu. I mean, if he just overperformed for you, feel free to use him, but not against a big top end player that only saw halftime like a Miro this week. Asmith supports. Who you dousing the flames on?
Badosin. You've got to slow your roll on Badosin. Yes, he outperformed everybody.
You're just terrified of London.
I am.
Like
why wouldn't
Spitfires are in your nightmares, just like flying around in your brain while you're sleeping at night.
They're fantasy landmines right now. I mean, you have no idea if you're going to get a 0. And maybe I'm a little bitter because I had Rascal and he put up a 0. Right. So, I mean, I'm just saying. But right now, Badosin, he fragged out and he went crazy. 122 fantasy points for his support is out of your mind crazy good. He did really, really, really well. But it's because they rolled the teams, and I think they've got a little tougher of a lineup this next week. And I venture to say there's also a big possibility that he may not start as well. Hagopin played all of preseason. There's a big chance that we end up seeing Hagopin.
Yeah, as of now, I'd still rather own Jae Hong. I'd rather own maybe even like Harry Hook. But, kind of those top end, those top 3. Jonak is another one I think I'd rather own over than, over Badosin at the moment. But obviously, once we get some clarity about playtime and how risky those guys are from that perspective, we'll get a lot of questions answered for fantasy. My support, like you took the number 1 guy, I'm going to douse some flames on number 2, Neko. I'm just not buying, like Boston is not a top half team, so they're not going to always have these matchups where they're just really able to get all the space they need and just be able to kind of do whatever they want and rack up these point totals like they were in the initial week. I'm looking to see here exactly what their matchups were, because off the top of my head, so they had the 4-0 against Florida. 4-0 stomps aren't going to be a regular thing, I don't think, for Boston. They're going to have to fight and scrape when they win more often than they did in the first week. They're not going to have a 50% 4-0 record here, and I think it's going to really, more so than all the other players on their team, I think Neko's really going to come down to earth. So don't overreact like crazy. Again, the kind of like he's probably number 10 or so, I'd say, in my rankings going forward. Big improvement from where he was before this week, I'll say that, though.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
How about DPS or Flex? Who you telling people to calm down on this week?
All right, this is a player that I personally have seen a lot of people tweeting and messaging in Discord and losing their minds over is Poco. Poco did amazing the first game against Houston. He popped off. He saw crazy bombs. You saw Poco all over the place, and you hadn't heard of Poco because he's not as big of a name and he's been going crazy. So everyone's like, oh, let me drop who I have and pick up Poco. Okay, calm your roll a little bit because you need to douse the flames on him, because the second game he put up almost no points. Poco, when they got rolled by London, he put up very few points, so we don't have a breakdown of how that happened, but it was very, very minor amount of points. And I wouldn't go dropping everybody you have. Now, in my 10-team league, I'm actually putting in a drop for Poco. I'm going to pick up Poco and drop Hotba, but that's a very minor person. I wouldn't drop like Libero or somebody like that for Poco. That's a little out of your mind. Slow your roll on Poco. He's a diva player, and he's not going to get 100 points every week.
Definitely no major arguments there. The guy I'm going to douse the flames on here could not be much farther up the list as far as point scorers go is Soon. Listen, am I saying don't play Soon? No, not at all. You still play Soon. Like, he had a really, really good week. The matchups are a whole lot tougher for these guys this week, though. It's going to come back down to earth a little bit, and I think Soon is going to be in that like 10 to 15 conversation as far as DPS go. Maybe a little bit higher. I don't really know. I'm not as sold on this LA Valiant team as a lot of other people are. I think they capitalized on Dallas at the right time. I think they had some things going for them this past week that may not carry weight throughout the rest of the season, and I think a lot of Soon owners might think they just won the lottery and got like a baby Fleta, and I don't think that's really what you've got. So by all means play him, but don't expect the world from him. Don't think you can do something silly and play an extra support player because you're going to get so many points from Soon. Just don't get too cute. Just keep him about where you had him before, right? Like, if he was considered your DPS 2 or 3, then he's still your DPS 2 or 3, and don't go crazy on Soon. All right. Just about to the end of this here, Asmith. Episode 2 almost in the books. We've just got to wrap things up with the mailbag. Listen, if you guys are enjoying the show, one thing that would really help us a lot is kind of, this was tough because we basically like got all the stats, drafted our league instantly, and then went straight into this episode. So we didn't have a lot of time to like ask for questions and things like that. But look very early in the week if you want to help the show out and try to come up with some questions, things that you might be asking yourself later in the week, so that we have them to talk about very early on in the process. Kind of the one flaw of the showtime that we've chosen here is getting viewer questions. But the first one's coming from Raycor. Asmith, if your players have a bad week, should you try to trade them off? I have Dia, but Shanghai doesn't seem like they can enable him. Also Chips, Mercy's not kind to his fantasy score. How are you handling players that underperform, Asmith?
You've got to look at it in a vacuum. You've got to look at each player personally and how their team did. It's more about the team than it is about the player individual performance. Players are going to have highs and lows. There's a thing called law of averages that happens, and usually they're going to have really high ones and really low ones, and they're probably going to end up somewhere in the middle, and that's where your player is going to end up. Dia did not do well. And do you want to trade him instantly? Maybe if you can get really high value for him, sure, but trade him for peanuts? No. That's not something I'm going to do. I'm going to sit on Dia and see if the Shanghai team can get their act together. Now, Chips is a whole different story. I am a firm believer in Chips. I picked up Chips in most of my leagues because I think Chips is very undervalued in the sense that he's playing Mercy now, but as soon as that Mercy patch comes through and Mercy gets out of this meta where she belongs, you're going to see Chips back on his Zen and back on his Ana. And those are good things for Chips and good things for support players. I would stash Chips for the rest of the season. I wouldn't trade him off or anything like that. I would stash him for later.
Yeah, completely agree on Chipsogen, and I don't know if you were setting me up, Raycor, but I really appreciate it because this is kind of a time-honored tradition in like fantasy football, and you do the exact opposite of what you're asking here, right? So when a player has a really, really bad week, their value is lower than it's going to be if they were to, say, rebound and have a good week, and almost no matter how long that takes, it's usually better to either you just kind of wait it out, right? I would rather trade for a player that just had a bad week if I really believed in them. Capitalize on that lower value. Capitalize on that angry owner that doesn't want to carry him anymore and doesn't trust him to play next week. So maybe you can, flash a lower end DPS player like, probably a bad example because I'm like trying to pick him up from this exact scenario, but like a Surefour or something like that, kind of like a lower end DPS player that didn't really overperform. Try to make a move like that where you're, picking up those players that are on the downturn right now, if you believe in them going forward. That's where the value is. That's how you win trades. Don't buy. I'm gonna screw this up, right? You don't want to. You want to sell high and you want to buy low.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Yep.
So that's the structure you want to get, not the other way around. I would definitely hold on to Chips. He's gonna jump around in value. Like it's gonna be crazy. I think once Mercy leaves, he might be the most improved out of that change across the board. Another question here from Raycor. Is there any chance Soul's going to play Guido over Fleta next week, or just really is Guido going to play at all in any capacity? What do you think, Asmith?
If
you're cutting out really bad, so I'm going to jump in so it doesn't sound bad. But yeah, so essentially, I think Guido's going to come in on rare occasion. I don't know who it's going to be for yet, but when Fleta comes out, it's just like resting somebody in a situation where they already think they've won. I think they're going to start just about every single match with Fleta, and then if they're like up 3-0, they might take him out and play somebody else or something along those lines. Asmith, did I just about get to where you were thinking with that one?
Pretty much. What I was going to say is I do think if they're going to play him, I think it'll be this week, because they got such an easy matchup. This is probably one of the easiest weeks they could possibly have. So this would be the week to play him, but I would never start him in fantasy. Guido is a player that I would leave on the bench or drop, period, because I don't think Guido's worth anything fantasy-wise.
Yeah, you can trade him with unsigned players if there's a weakness on your roster that you need to address. Last question here before we close out the show. We've got a question from Monkey Prince. Who to trade for Poco? He's got Guido or Spree. He says he can't drop Fraggy or Zupe due to the 2-2-2 rule. Kind of a really important thing to point out, that you guys might have to keep some of these guys. Like you might have to, if you want to drop Fraggy, you might have to go out and pick yourself up a tank in order to be able to do that. The 10-team league problem is, I think, what we should call that, because it'll be a lot harder to pull off in those leagues. But man, Guido or Spree, I think both are great options. Like if you're talking about trading with a player, you're probably not going to get anything for either of those guys. If you're talking about unsigned players, either of them are easy choices, I think. Any disagreements there, A. Smith? Anything to add?
No, I think Guido and Spree are not worth anything in your fantasy value. I venture that they're players I would never pick up. Therefore, I would drop. I would never start. Don't keep them on your bench if you're not tempted to start them.
Yeah, definitely good advice there. If you're not going to use them, there's no reason to have them. A. Smith, that's going to wrap up this week, man. We did it. We did it without Blevins, so a little less beard than we'll usually have at our disposal, but I think we did an adequate bang-up job without him. Really appreciate you hanging out with us. Anything to say here as we head out and end the show?
Man, this was a lot of fun. I'm really excited. The league that we're going to be talking about a lot is this expert league is what we kind of call it or whatever. But we're going to kind of weekly break down those matchups of how we ended up doing. I think that's going to be fun for y'all to follow our league with a bunch of different people who really know things about fantasy. And so it's a competitive league for us. And I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about the season. Hopefully Winston's Lab can get things a little quicker than they did this week so we can be a little more prepped for this episode.
Yeah, that would be nice. We might have to make some adjustments if it doesn't happen, but we'll keep you guys up to date. As always, you can follow the show at HNP_FOWL play. That's High Noon Podcast of Foul Play. If you want to ask us any questions or just kind of, have some fun, goof around with us, you can always find us in Discord as well. That's going to wrap things up here. Really appreciate everybody stopping by, hanging out with us. I also really appreciated that A. Smith let a little bit of that Southern out when he gave us a y'all at the end there. So y'all come back now, you hear. Probably, the McCree branded show can really only be helped by a little bit of a Southern or a Western drawl here. So thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. And until next week, we will see you guys. Good luck in your week 2 matchups.
Yeah, we'll see y'all later.
Y'all.